Thanks for coming tonight. Welcome to St. Cloud State University. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Brian Lauer, and it's quite an honor and a privilege to give this talk because I am a big proponent for the freedom to think. You know, it's like, I think everybody would agree you should have the freedom to think, right? Anybody oppose that? No. Well, to think, you need to see both sides of an issue. You need to get all the information to make an informed decision, but it's not happening today in our classrooms. It's not happening in our government schools, in our media, and in our museums. It is a blind chance perspective of the past. That's all that's allowed. And if that's all, it'd be like thinking this building got put together by chance. That'd be absurd, right? Well, how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance? Because we're a lot more complex than this building. But if that's all you ever see, you just memorize. You don't think. And Dr. Thomas Chamberlain, he warned about this over 100 years ago. He was the president of the Chicago Academy of Sciences. He was the former president of the University of Wisconsin and the first head of the geology department at the University of Chicago. So he's a pretty sharp guy. And he warned researchers not to let one hypothesis dominate their thinking. Instead, they should have or seek multiple working hypotheses. That way you can sharpen your analytical skills, you can compare and contrast, you can think critically, you can reduce bias. Otherwise, down at the bottom, you just simply memorize and conform. Well, guess what, folks? There's one dominant hypothesis called the Big Bang. There's another dominant hypothesis called evolution. And if that's all you see, you just memorize and conform. And that bothers me. And that bothers me a lot. But what bothers me even more than that is the information that they use to prop up this blind chance perspective is false. Should textbooks be accurate? And I think everybody should agree with that. This is a booth that I had at the fair this year trying to get this issue into the limelight. And yeah, everybody thinks textbooks should be accurate. Well, that's what I thought too. And so I went through this. This is the summer of 2024. I went through the curriculum, high school, grade school, and middle school textbooks in St. Cloud in our schools. And I found several errors. You can see them on the table, or on the, that's just a handful of the ones that I found down on the stage there. But I found 30-some that are outdated information, false information, misinterpretations, or just blind, or just belief systems about the past. I mean, should we teach belief systems in the science class, or should we teach science? And so I pointed out in one of these things to the curriculum director at St. Cloud, and this is false and this is why. And then I linked to sources like Nature and NASA and PubMed and Smithsonian. And then I did it the next day and the next day and the next day, and I didn't hear a response. So I called her up and got her email, or I got her voicemail, and I asked, do I have your right email? I'm not getting any responses. And she said, yeah, we're getting your emails, we're just working on it. And then when she finally did get back to me, she said our education team, including our science content leader, will work alongside teachers this year and ensure all materials are used from Discovery Ed with students meet the goals of the Minnesota Science Standards. So basically, I'm showing her stuff that's wrong, and she's saying, well, we're just teaching the Minnesota State Standards. And so I asked her, well, what standard says we're only 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she did not respond to me. Keep in mind, now this is noteworthy, the curriculum director did not respond to this email, but the superintendent did. And she said, we are in the process of reviewing your concern and our response with our district's law firm. You contacted a law firm because there's bad information in your science book? Why don't you contact the publisher and let them know you got some bad information in your science books? Because these are online textbooks. All they have to do is, take down the video. And so they contacted a law firm. So I went to the school board and I asked, would you please contact the publishers so we can get these errors out of the textbooks before the school year starts? And I left them my number, and you only get 3 minutes at the school board meeting. So I hit 4 or 5, things that were wrong with a bunch of sources. So if they want more information, they got to give me a call. And I left them my phone number, and nobody called. And so I emailed all the directors, or all of them. Oh, and you can see these on my YouTube channel. But so I emailed everyone and I asked, did this get talked about? Was this anything done? And one of them responded and said, the superintendent let us know you've been working on the curriculum director with it. And actually, no. So I had to respond back. It's like, if they were working with me, I wouldn't have had to go to the school board meeting. So she told the school board that the curriculum director was working on it with me, even though the curriculum director stopped answering my emails. So that's a little bit disturbing in my case. Okay, and then so I let her know that that doesn't work. You know, they aren't working with me. And so then I let her know that, and then I got a response back from, this is a school board person I'm dealing with, and she responded that over the past months of your communication, the Director so-and-so has reviewed your concern carefully and also passed them along for review by our science lead teacher, and it goes on and on. And guess what? I got another email from a different board member, and it had the exact same paragraph in it. You know, over the past months of your communication, Director so-and-so has reviewed your concern carefully and also passed them along for review by the science lead teacher. And so I went back to the school board again, and I said, you know, I hope to get these errors out before the school year started. But now the school year has started, and now any student in St. Cloud or around the country that's using this curriculum, and you can see the errors up here on the stage, that's just a handful of them, they could learn false information. And if I hope it, it bothers me. And I said, I hope it bothers you too, that you do something about it. Because, if it doesn't bother you that there's false information in the textbooks, you aren't going to warn the teacher that it's false, or you're not going to warn the students or the parents, then I think you're real close to knowingly lying to students. And that's real, that attitude shouldn't be tolerated. And if there is anybody in this room, I hope there's nobody in this room like that, but if there is, that person should be reprimanded or voted out at the next election. And so I made my comment, and the very next day, the superintendent emailed me and said, the concern you brought forward is now considered resolved. They didn't do anything about getting the errors out of the textbooks. They considered it resolved, and that irritated me. So I went back to the school board and I said, let's let the voters decide if it's resolved. Let's let the parents decide if it's resolved, or the legislators. And I said, because this is a really bad look. You're you're keeping false information in the textbooks, and that's going to give people one more reason to distrust the government. You're going to give parents one more reason to homeschool their kids. You're going to give taxpayers one more reason to resent their tax money being used to misinform kids. And by the way, you might have give legislators one more reason not to fund it if you're not going to give accurate information. And so I said my piece, and I went through their code of conduct. This is for St. Cloud, and I zoom in on here. It says multiple and differing perspectives contribute to informed decision making and learning. And I agree, but they're only getting a blind chance perspective of the past in this science class. That's the Big Bang and evolution, which I think is, we all came from a single living cell by chance. That's like thinking this microphone got put together by chance. That'd be pretty absurd, right? And then it also says we all benefit when communities work together toward common goals. So guess what I'm doing tomorrow night? I'm going to the school board meeting, and I'm going to say, we can all benefit if we can work toward a common goal of getting accurate textbooks. Parents would like it, taxpayers would like it. Now, would you like it? And we'll see how many school board members want accurate textbooks, because that's going to be very important at the next election. Okay, and we did this at St. Cloud, at the community college. Do you like being taught false information? Who likes to be taught false information? No, nobody likes taught false information. That's right. And so let's move into some of the false information that I found in our textbooks. So keep in mind, this is our public school textbook in St. Cloud, and we need to define terms. Dr. Glenn Collins, he was at Ohio State, and he was in a room full of physicists, and he asked them, what's the difference between science and science fiction? And nobody answered. So let's define science according to how they defined it in high school. It says the National Academy of Sciences defines science as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. So a science needs to be testable. If it's not testable, it's not science. So let's just do this. Every representative form of every known phyla on Earth evolved in the ocean. Okay, who thinks that's testable? Can we see things coming out of the ocean turning into people? Can we put some stuff in there and watch molecules turn into man? Can we watch amoebas turn into elephants? Can we see fish turn into fishermen? No, we can't. So that's not science. That's not testable. That's a belief system of the past. And let's define evolution. You know, all life on Earth is related to a common ancestor that existed about 3.8 billion years ago. This process is called evolution. Okay, can we test that? Can we see molecules turning into man? And we'll have Q&A at the end. I'm looking forward to that. But that's not science. And also it says scientists have tracked the lineage of human evolution all the way back to lemur-like creatures. Okay, can we see lemurs turning into people? No, again, that's a belief system. That's not science. And this actually, I agree with what they say here. This is a moment of honesty for them. It says we do not know exactly how or when the first forms of life developed. So they don't know how life began. They don't know where life began or when life began. But that's not what they teach the kids. Okay, in this section right here, water is essential to life on Earth. It says the chemicals, the raw ingredients, and this is a video that they show them. The chemicals, the raw ingredients that make up life are constantly sloshing around, bumping into each other and combining into new chemistry. This is happening in the water where they got degrees of freedom and they go on like that. And then it says over millions of years that process can lead to living organisms. Can it? Over millions of years? Can life start in water? That's what they want everybody to think. But here's a NASA scientist that says no. They admit water is a problem for the origin of life. And you can see the whole clip here. If you go into rsr.org/NASA-water, you'll be able to listen to this. That's a question to a NASA scientist. This is an international stage in Germany. And she gets asked a question and she doesn't want to answer it. It makes her squirm. But this is the question that Bob Enyart got proposed on a national stage.
This is for Dr. Wojtek, for Mary. It is from Bob, an independent science reporter. And the question is, rather than an asset, isn't water the enemy of prebiotic molecules? It's the universal solvent. And outside of a living organism, water dissolves life's building blocks like amino acids, sugars like RNA and DNA, various kinds of carbohydrates and other polymers. Shouldn't this chemical challenge be more openly acknowledged in astrobiology? I guess this assumes it's not acknowledged, but what do you say?
I think it's acknowledged.
And then she tap danced around it, but it's not acknowledged in our science book. But to the moderator's credit, he brings her back.
Sorry, I guess I didn't get it.
Well, I think the question is, it posits that water is a challenge for prebiotic evolution, that because it attacks the various molecules involved.
So in some of the prebiotic things, this is something that people think about. Hydration and dehydration reactions are really important in prebiotic chemistry. And so postulating that life could evolve when there is no opportunity for an environmental separation to allow dehydration reactions actually is a problem, and people do address that.
Well, they don't address it in the science books. It's not addressed there. It says over millions of years that process can lead to living organisms. That's false statement number one. And then this video, Chemical Origins of Life, says there are a number of theories that attempt to explain the origin of life on Earth. The one with perhaps the most scientific support is sometimes called the prebiotic soup theory. So this is the best one they got. And it says, and these compounds can then be dissolved in the oceans of the early Earth, and in the oceans they get transported all over the place. They end up interacting with each other, forming more and more complex molecules that start to have this ability to replicate. And Dr. Jonathan Sarfati says, no, it can't happen that way. It's impossible. And this is what he has to say.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water-absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
So what do we have? We have the textbook saying that it can happen in the ocean, and we've got this PhD scientist saying that it can't happen in the ocean. So what do? I emailed the curriculum director and I said, can you email me a link to a scientific paper that shows how life started in water? You know, let's see the paper. If you're going to teach it, what do you have to validate it? And Dr. Randy Galuza, he says there's not a scientific paper on the planet that shows how life came from non-life. And so the ball's in their court. Are they going to prove what they're teaching, or are they just going to teach it? And up until, until they prove otherwise, I think this is false statement number 2. And then they got a video that says, you've probably figured out that water equals life. It's like, what? Water equals life? Yeah, life needs water, but water doesn't mean it's life. That doesn't mean anything. So what's their definition of life? A minimal definition of life is that the system has the ability to replicate itself. Does water have the ability to replicate itself? If you have half a glass of water and put it on the counter at night, are you going to wake up and have it have a full glass of water? No, water can't replicate. So this statement's false statement number 3. And then this says, if you trace the history of water back billions of years, now again, you can't do that. Billions of years, that's not observable or testable. It's not testable, therefore it's not science according to their definition of science. This is a belief system in the past. Okay, trace it back millions of years, it is likely. Likely is a fuzzy word, meaning they haven't done it. So watch out for those fuzzy words. And it says, it is likely that water provided the liquid environment for life to begin. So again, they're trying to pound it down your throat that life started in water, but there's a NASA scientist that says no. And there's a PhD in chemistry that says no. But again, this is not science. But that's not going to stop your textbook. This is a St. Cloud State textbook trying to explain how life began. It says somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow is not science. And I talked to a biology instructor in another state, and he says he always has his students have a journal, and they write down fuzzy words like this, somehow, because that's not science. So then the students know when they're being taught a belief system about the past like this, and when they're being taught science, when they can actually observe and test it. And there's people that they might try and give a snow job and say, well, they've figured out how life began. Oh, really? Well, then how come there's $10 million on the table for anybody who can show how the DNA got in a cell and organized and replicated itself? $10 million. You don't even have to make life, just make the DNA. $10 million. There used to be $1 million on the table if you could show how life evolved naturally, but it was on the table for 13 years, nobody could do it, so they took it down, and now they bumped it to 10 million. Just show how the DNA got together. Prove it. Okay, and this is the history of life on Earth. It says evidence for evolution, and I couldn't believe it when I saw this. It says that humans are only 1.6% genetically different from chimpanzees. 1.6. That's been wrong for decades. And a guy came by at the fair and he said, well, they should update the textbooks. And I said, this is a 2024 textbook. It doesn't get any more updated than this. And you go into PubMed, which is a part of the NIH, and it says divergence between samples of chimpanzee and human DNA is 5%, not 1.6. So their own government source is saying that it's wrong. And keep in mind, the difference between 1.6 and 5% is 100 million base pairs. So there's 100 million differences between just 1.6 and 5%. And they even just blatantly say it. We share 98.5% of our DNA sequence with chimpanzee is probably an error. A better estimate would be 95%. But then you go into Nature, and this is in 2010, so 14 years ago. It says the fickle Y chromosome. It says the common chimp and human chromosomes are horrendously different. That's not 1.6%. Horrendously different. Well, how different is it? You're going to have to go into answersresearchjournal.org and read this paper by Jeffrey Tompkins. He's got a PhD in genetics from Clemson, and he says, and this was 2013, so 11 years ago, this is what scientists were saying, that only 69% of the chimpanzee X chromosome was similar to human, and only 43% of the Y chromosome. Yeah, that's horrendously different. You're 57% different. You're more different than you are the same. Yeah, that's horrendously different. That's why the Nature said that. And genome-wide, only 70% of the chimpanzee DNA was similar to human under the most optimal sequence slice conditions. So that's what the scientists, that's what the up-to-date information is saying today, and yet the school board won't update it. And this one, I kind of like how they put this, a lot of facts in a short amount of time.
You may have heard that human and chimp DNA are 98% similar. Well, that's not quite accurate. First, the chimp genome is about 4% larger than the human. Second, they only compared similar sections from each genome when they came up with a 98% similarity figure, also excluding 25% of the human DNA and 18% of the chimp DNA.
Well, how similar were the two genomes when they were compared side by side?
Between 66% and 84% at most.
Okay. I know evolutionists needed that 98% to be able to support the idea that humans branched off about 6 million years ago. So if it's only actually 84%, wouldn't that be too many genetic changes for the evolutionary timeline?
It's too many. That's why they needed the 1.6%, trying to squeeze all those mutations into a short time frame, 6 million, and now it's 30% different. That's really hard on that theory. Oh, so 1.6%, that's false statement number 4, according to a PhD geneticist, according to PubMed, and according to Nature. This is a false statement, and our school board doesn't care. They don't care that kids are being taught that we're 1.6, even though that's wrong. And then this one, I really couldn't believe this. These are images real similar to Haeckel's drawings. Notice on the right, it doesn't matter if you're a bird or a bunny or a person. Look on the left, your embryos are all pretty much the same. And that was proven wrong 100 years ago. And it's still in the textbooks, in a 2024 textbook this year. And what, I mean, they look similar. Those images are real similar to Haeckel's drawings, but he forged them. He was a contemporary of Darwin, and he loved the theory, but there wasn't any evidence for the theory, so he faked some. This is what they actually look like. They aren't similar, but he wanted people to think that. And this is a PhD from, he's got a PhD in molecular and cell biology. My question is, hey, science expert lead at high school, do you have a PhD in chemistry? Do you have a PhD in molecular and cell biology? Well, if you don't, I suggest you listen to this guy, and it's from UCal Berkeley.
If you go back earlier in development, the different classes of vertebrates look even more different.
According to Wells, Haeckel, and many modern textbooks, mislead students not just because of faked drawings, but because they leave out the earliest stages of embryonic development. What students are shown as the first stage of embryonic development is actually the mid-stage.
And very few textbooks show those earliest stages, and yet that's the whole point. It's the earliest stages that are supposed to be the most similar, and they're not.
And they're not. But don't take my word for it or his word for it. Go into New Scientist. How fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn-out lies. This is from 2015. It says, it's embarrassing but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong. Exaggerated to fit a thesis. So instead of changing the theory to fit the evidence, they change the evidence to fit the theory. And we're going to see that again tonight. And this is not uncommon. And then another one, New Scientist from 1997. Embryonic fraud lives on. And these 19th century drawings, so back in the 1870s, 1880s, drawings still appear in reference books such as Gray's Anatomy. And this guy says, although Haeckel confessed to drawings from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Vienna, the drawings still persist. That's the real mystery. Why are they using false information to prop up this blind chance perspective of the past? Maybe it's because there isn't any real information that'll prop it up. So again, this is inaccurate number 5. And let's take a look at our eye. Okay, it says 400 million years of evolution has been conspiring against you. And these are educators writing this. This is a logical fallacy. That's a logical fallacy of reification. That's when you give human attributes to something that's not alive or not real. Can evolution conspire? No. No, evolution can't conspire. So this is false statement number 6. And so why are our eyes an engineering nightmare? Now that's got a built-in assumption into the question. I would suggest that our eyes are not wired backwards. A valid question would be, are our eyes an engineering nightmare? And I would strongly say no. But they're teaching the kids that herein lies the problem. Our retinas are wired backwards. The light has to go through these cells to get to our photoreceptors, and that's backwards. We'd be better off having octopus eyes because they have the sensors in the front of the cells. You know, during the evolution of the cephalopod eye, the retina was never flipped inwards, which is the logical way to have it. Well, no, octopus live in the water, and water filters out the harmful rays for UV light from the sun. sun, so they're fine. If we had eyes like that, we'd be blind, I believe. Okay, so our eyes are not wired backwards. And this means that nature invented the camera-like eye twice. Wait a minute, can nature invent? Again, the people who write these textbooks and these videos, it's just stunning to me that they'll use logical fallacies like this. Nature can't invent. So that's false statement number 7. And it goes on, scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. There aren't any scientifically proven positives. Well, they must not be reading the scientific journals. I mean, the Smithsonian, when was this? 2015, 9 years ago, they were explaining why our eyes seem to be wired backwards. Light has to pass through nerve cells to get to the rods and cones, but that order is no mistake. The glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light. And I like how Medical Express does this. They dive in real deep. And the glial cells can guide light just like fiber optic cables. That's an incredible design. And it says the green are concentrated 5 to 10 times more by the glial cells. The light was not scattered evenly, but concentrated into a few spots. So what does that mean? It means this optimization is such that color vision during the day is enhanced, while nighttime vision suffers very little. So this statement that says scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards, that's false statement number 8. And this statement that says there aren't any scientifically proven positives, that's false statement number 9. I mean, they're a decade, almost a decade behind what the journals are saying. And even Darwin himself said to suppose that the eye could have formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. And I agree with Charles Darwin. I agree that it is absurd to the highest degree to think that our eyes got here by natural selection. I agree with that. But then down at the bottom it says, well, it should not be considered subversive of the theory. It's like, yeah, it's absurd, but don't hold that against the theory. And then this one's humanoid evolution. And Dr. Carl Werner, he just released 3 books and 6 videos in March that document over 100 cases of fraud in human evolution. And he says he doesn't use fraud lightly. You know, in Nebraska, man, they said that this tooth was an ape-man tooth when it was actually a pig tooth. He says that's not fraud. That's a mistake. But what is fraud is lying about when you found it and also hiding the pig jaw from the public, so they couldn't compare it to that. So there was 2 cases of fraud in that. But that's another talk. I think that's CS 104 on my YouTube channel. Let's see. Okay, but what does he say? He says, faced with the fact that more than 200 species of ape men have been disproved may cause some to reasonably doubt the theory of human evolution. Yeah, I'm part of that some. I doubt the theory of human evolution. And it may also cause some to question the capability of scientists to objectively evaluate any fossil they believe to be an ape man. Yeah, I'm part of that some too. I question their objectivity. Because you don't get money for finding monkey bones. You got to find the ape men to make the big leads. And we're going to show you that later on, how they'll cut Lucy's hip. Instead of changing the theory to fit the evidence, they'll change the evidence to fit the theory. And they go on here, and this is evolutionary anthropology. It says that an almost complete skeleton of a female Australopithecus afarensis, that's Lucy, I believe, is who they're talking about, but it's almost complete. This is a 10th grade textbook out of Ricori, the remarkably complete skeleton of Lucy. And this is a St. Cloud State textbook, nearly complete skeleton. So this is almost complete, remarkably complete, nearly complete. You know, there's 200 some bones in our body. What would remarkably complete be? How many bones do you think? Anybody? You know, nearly complete, almost like 180 maybe? You know, what did they found? They found 40. That's not nearly complete. That's not remarkably complete. That's not almost complete. Those are bold-faced lies. There's no other way to put it in my book. Almost complete, no, it's not. That's false statement number 10. And when we look at the chimp hip, okay, on the left, that's a chimp hip. On the right, that's a human hip. And in the middle, that's Lucy's hip. And I had a kiosk next to the anthropology department, and I said, they cut Lucy's hip to turn it from a chimp hip to a human hip. And she said, no, we didn't. And I said, sure they did. She said, no, they didn't. And I said, sure they did. I got it on my computer. Do you want to see it? And she said, no. She didn't want to see it. Just like the school board doesn't want to see evidence that goes against their theory. Don't confuse me with the facts. I got my mind made up. She didn't want to see it. And I suppose you sleep easier at night, not knowing what would go against your theory. But this is from Nova, In Search of Human Origins, Part 2. This is their video. But listen to what they say at the beginning.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
You could read a newspaper through it. That's not perfect.
As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Well, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back together the way you want to, are they going to show this to the kids? No. Why don't they show that video to the kids? They manipulated the evidence and they aren't showing it. Again, they changed the evidence to fit the theory instead of changing the theory to fit the evidence. Then you got this history of life on Earth. Notice how humans broke off of something that became chimpanzees. And this tree of life, there we are on the tree of life. We broke off of something that became insects, which broke off of something that became mushrooms, which broke off of something that became bacteria. And it all came from a single living cell billions of years ago. Okay, can we prove that? Even evolutionists don't buy it. You know, that Darwin, this is Stephen Jay Gould, he came up with punctuated equilibrium. And when I meet an evolutionist, sometimes I'll ask him, what denomination are you? Are you a fundamental like Darwin and it's happened slowly over long periods of time? And there wasn't any evidence for that. So then Goldschmidt, he developed the hopeful monster where it all happened all at once. He had all these mutations all at once and the first bird came from a reptile egg. Well, that was too liberal for Stephen Jay Gould, so he came up with a moderate position. He came up with punctuated equilibrium, where it all happened as somewhere really fast, but it wasn't all at once, but the fossil record didn't catch it. But he says the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. So what's he saying? There aren't any. Extremely rare to have transitional fossils, but that tree should be all full of transitional fossils, but they aren't there. He says that's the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary tree that adorns our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. So it's imagination. That's not science. And then this is Mark Pagel. He says, but instead of finding the slow, smooth, and progressive changes Lyell and Darwin had expected, new species appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then remaining unchanged for millions of years, patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation. So basically, they're not finding evidence in the fossil record for the tree of life. What they are finding is for the creation orchard. And that's what they're saying. So this diagram is not based on evidence according to Stephen Jay Gould, and so that's not accurate. And then it says they're trying to think, oh, you might think that the elephant's most closely related to humpback whale. But it says humpback whale is actually more closely related to hippos, hippopotamuses. And it says millions of years, again, can we test millions of years? No, that's a belief system. Millions of years of mutations and change have given rise to both species from a common ancestor. So mutations, that's how you get things. That's how you get changes. So like if I had a little pamphlet here on how to make a skateboard, and all I could do was copying errors. All I could do is misspell words, you know, rip a word out here, put it in there, rip a page out there, double this. I mean, just copying errors, is that going to turn that space or that skateboard into a space shuttle? No, that'd be absurd. You know how much more absurd to think that process would turn a single living cell into a person. And there's a lot of smart PhDs that don't go along with evolution. This is from dissentfromdarwin.org. You have to be a PhD to sign this thing, and that's what they do. It says, we are skeptical of the claims of the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence of Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Okay, 1,200 PhD scientists have signed off on this, and these are people with a PhD from chemistry from Harvard. It's a PhD from organic chemistry from the MIT, PhD in physics from Princeton, PhD in geophysics and space physics from UCLA, PhD in philosophy from Princeton, and it just goes on and on. You know, bioengineering and biology and etymology from all these secular universities and other universities, and they can put their career on the line for signing something like this. If you kick that sacred cow of evolution, you might not get tenure like Dr. Gonzalez at Iowa State, or you might get your job vanish like Crocker. I forget where that was. James Madison, I believe. But yeah, just watch Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, and they'll go through how these people, if they question or even just bring up intelligent design, they lose their job. Okay, and it's getting so bad. Oh, and also, you know, at descentfromdarwin.org, there's 1,200 PhDs who doubt Darwinian evolution. I was able to talk to Eric Putnam going back to his car after one of his talks, and we're talking about this. And I said, I'm just appalled at the lack of curiosity by our science departments, because there's a theory that makes accurate predictions, what's in a comet, what's in an asteroid, and they don't even want to look at it. And he said, well, you know, professors are snobs. And he said, I should know because I am one. You know, he's a real likable guy. But I emailed him afterwards and I said, could this fact that over 1,200 scientists doubt Darwinian evolution, could this fact be taught in class when kids are being taught evolution? And he never responded. But it's gotten so bad that they've got this, thethirdwayofelvolution.com. It says, other mechanisms are essential for the comprehensive understanding of evolutionary process. And they want alternative ideas for the evolutionary process. What does that tell me and tell you? They need alternative ideas because the ideas they have don't work. Mutations and natural selection do not explain what's happening here. A lot better would be epigenetics. And it says that evolution is the unifying theme in biology by most scientists. Well, yeah, they better agree with it, or they're not gonna keep their job. Somebody asked me today, am I a professor? And I said, no, I got way more freedom to speak than your professor. And I was talking to a professor a while back, and he said that he believed that God made the Big Bang. And a guy, he directed evolution. I said, well, can you teach that in class? Well, we're not talking about what's happening in class. We're talking about this. So basically, ask your teachers, do you believe what you're teaching us? Are you teaching us everything you know about this? Because there could be some evidence that undermines that theory, and they are afraid to share it. And so what happens, what's a better thing is epigenetics, modification of gene expression rather than alteration of the genetic code itself. And ICR is doing some really good job with continuous environmental tracking with these blind cave fish. You know, they can take, and they found out, you know, because when you're in a cave, you don't need eyes, you don't need pigment. And the evolutionary story is, well, you had some mutant fish millions of generations or however long ago, and that mutant fish without the eyes, without the pigments, could survive just a little bit better. And then its offspring could survive just a little bit better. And so countless generations go by, and now everybody in that cave is descendants of the mutant one. But when they do it scientifically, and I've seen two different sources. It happens in 4 generations or 1 generation, depending on which video you're watching. But it happens rapidly. That's not chance random processes. And then I asked the guy giving the speech one time, and I asked him, well, what happens when they take the blind fish into the light? Do they get their eyes back? And he said he didn't know. He didn't see any of the studies, but I found one of the studies, and it actually said in 1 generation they get their eyes back. So there's something happening in the embryo, and I'm saying you probably did that experiment in the lab. What if you did it in the cave? Maybe they wouldn't have their eyes. So I'm saying that there's sensors, and they're saying, continuous environmental tracking, saying that there's sensors in the embryo which sense what environment they're going to be in, and then they switch on and off these epigenetic genes. And so in the creation literature, there's words like regulated, rapid, repeatable, reversible, targeted, and predictable, not blind chance. But guess what? Those words are showing up in evolution literature too, and secular literature, because that's what they're seeing. And this goes on to say, species adapt to their environment due to natural selection. Well, there may be a little bit of that, but I think it's continuous environmental tracking or epigenetics. So I would say that's kind of a misleading statement right there. They're leaving a lot out with that statement. Okay, and this could be an assignment in class. Explain the relationship between humans and mice. All right? What if somebody put, you know what? The designer made mice to produce mice, and the designer made humans to produce humans. Do you think they're going to get any credit? Well, this is what they're looking for, sample responses. Humans and mice are both mammals, but are only distantly related. Genetic testing, fossils of common ancestor, and comparative anatomy. That's what they're going to use to prove that we came from something that became a mouse and a human. Okay, genetic testing, that's kind of blowing up in their face a little bit. And then because genetics, you know, bats and whales have identical genes specifying echolocation. Did bats and whales have a common ancestor? No, I don't think so. I think they had a common designer. They had genes for echolocation. You know, a designer had genes for echolocation, and he used it in a bat and he used it in a whale. That's how I look at it. But they keep on saying it was a common ancestor. Convergent evolution explains similarities between unrelated organisms. And it says, see, you got the same number of bones in a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. Therefore, they had common ancestors. Another view is they had a common designer. You know, kids think about both of them. And again, this is a belief system. This isn't observable or testable. This is a belief system. And then it says the bones of the whale's flipper and a human hand show a similar structure and have evolved according to their specific functions. Well, I would say, no, they were designed according to their specific functions. You know, the whale flipper was designed and the human hand was designed. But again, that's a belief system. That's not science. And then it says the concept of homology is the idea that evolution uses the same parts of the same building blocks to build different structures. Again, they're doing it again. This is that logical fallacy called reification. Evolution can't build stuff. It can't use stuff. Okay, but if they changed it and said that a creator uses the same parts or the same building blocks to build different structures, that would work. But to say that evolution does that, no, that's false statement number 13. And then they're talking about these little spurs on snakes. We can find the spur, this little white piece right here. That's what's left of the pelvis of the hip bone of the snakes from its lizard ancestors. So they believe that lizards turned into snakes, and that's a vestigial organ that's not used for anything anymore. But actually, that's a belief system, and it is used for something. Dr. Jerry Bergman, who has 9 degrees, he blew this one out of the water. He says those spurs are useful when climbing trees, and it's also useful in courtship and mating, and they only protrude during the breeding season. There is a reason for it. It's not vestigial. Just like they tried to say that the whales had vestigial organs, but those are used for mating. Just like they used to say, scientists used to say humans had 100 vestigial organs, and they've all found a use for all of them, even the appendix. There's a use for that. It's designed for a purpose. Okay, let's go on to the fossil record. For a rock fossil to form, the body of the dead animal or plant must undergo fast, complete burial, showing the decay process. So to get a fossil, it has to be buried rapidly. And we can do an experiment right here. Go out to the ditches in the road. Are they full of deer fossils? You know that dead deer on the side of the road, is that turning into a fossil? No, it gets scavenged, it decomposes. The only way a fossil forms is if it's buried rapidly. Therefore, any layer of rock that has fossils in it was laid down rapidly. And that's the whole geologic column. It's a sign of a flood, not millions of years. There's another perspective of that. And development on Earth, okay, it says, now this, the universe sprang into existence. Is that science? Can we test that? No, that's not science. What's that doing in a science book? You can believe it if you want, but that's not science. And it says, clouds of gas and dust from the Big Bang. Gravity pulled this cooling matter into piles, clumping it together into dense knots. As the pressure increased, so did the temperature of these knots, and the first stars were born. That's what they're teaching the kids. Matter of fact, not could have, not might have. This is what happened, kids. But they don't tell them that it's violating Boyle's law. You know, as the area decreases, the pressure increases. And Dr. Gary Parker, when he was learning this in grad school, he asked the professor, he said, you know, how can this happen when gas pressure is 60 to 100,000 times stronger than gravity? And the professor said, well, maybe they should call it the nebulous theory instead of the nebula theory. But they go on to say the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along the Hudson Bay in Quebec. Okay, so the Earth's oldest rock was found in Quebec. Well, this was in 2008. Well, in 2019, NASA says the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. Okay, they both can't be right. Are they calling NASA a liar? And then in the article it says the rock crystallized about 20 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface. So how do you get a rock 12 miles under the surface onto the moon Well, there is a theory called the hydroplate. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but that explains it perfectly. This statement right here, the Earth's oldest rock was discovered along the Hudson Bay, that's false statement number 14, according to NASA. So they aren't updating the textbooks, and I don't know why. But this is a taste of the hydroplate theory. There's a lot of things that the Big Bang predicts, and it's always wrong. When they get the images from the Hubble Deep Field image, when they get images from the James Webb Space Telescope, they're always predicting they're going to see galaxies forming as they're looking so far back. And it's getting to be such a laughingstock. Jason Lyle, he says, well, your predictions are wrong. And once you find out that they're wrong, I predict you're going to say that a galaxy is formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. But let's just take a look at this from Kevin Lee.
There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. When the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, oh yeah, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting moons. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory.
Yeah, that's from Twin Cities Creation Science Association. They have a YouTube channel, TCCSA, where you can see shorts like that. It's also broken into different playlists like biology, geology, anthropology. So if you want to get all the information on that part of that subject, that's a good YouTube source for you. And they've also found sea plankton found on the outer surface of the International Space Station. How does plankton get up there? How does that rock get onto the moon? And this was from a museum in Hastings. It says meteorites often closely resemble Earth rocks. Yeah, I think it's because they came from Earth, and the hydroplate theory is really good about explaining that. And this is just a little clip. It might not make sense to why. Just watch the guy on the bottom right. What he's seeing, it just validates perfectly what the hydroplate theory says.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid, called Bennu, is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here in mid-ocean ridges. This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow. What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth, as Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow, she works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio in creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs a raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do.
Yeah, so that's my YouTube channel. You can see I've got a playlist for college talks, all that stuff. But how do you get victimized? You're only taught one perspective. And so you can't think outside the box. You have to think inside this materialistic box. So it'd be like if I had a chest of gold, and you can have all the grant money and all the funding in the world and all the time in the world to look for that gold, but you can only look in Atwood. And I hide it outside, and you trip over, and you'll never find it outside because you're only allowed to look inside. And you may trip over it every day coming here from work, coming back and forth to work, but you'll never find it because you aren't allowed to look outside the box. And that's what's happening in science today. You're forced to think of a blind chance perspective of the past. And so all that information there that they were talking about, I mean, that red line, that's perfectly for the hydroplate theory. That's why the guy was so excited. And it's just appalling, the lack of curiosity in our science departments in high school and college and at the community college. I invited them. We had our very first hydroplate conference online last year. I invited them all to tune in. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Nobody ever called. But this theory makes accurate predictions. And that's the currency of science. If you can make accurate predictions. There was a professor who let me talk to his students at a college, and he said, you got 15 minutes. And I was done in 10. I said, any questions? And the professor said, well, what would you do if you were king of science for a day? I said, we'd put all the theories on the table and we'd focus on the one that makes accurate predictions. Plus, we won't teach belief systems about the past, like the Big Bang and evolution. Those are belief systems. A heart surgeon doesn't have to know where the heart came from. He just needs to know its anatomy really well. Yeah, and so but if you're only taught one perspective, you're not being educated. My education didn't start till I was almost 40, when my cousin sent me a video in the mail of Kent Hovind, and he showed another perspective of looking at the past, and that's when I began to think. Up until then, I was just memorizing, and I was very confused. The world just didn't make sense. But now it makes sense. She cracked the door open to it, to creation, and I kicked it down. And hopefully some people here might do that. And what does the textbook say? The Earth used to be a molten blob, used to be in a molten state. And it says igneous rock, granite is igneous rock, and igneous rock forms when a molten material cools. Okay, so granite cooled. But yet Dr. Walt Brown, now he's the guy who came up with the hydroplate theory. He's got a PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering, sharp guy. Ran the Benet military lab for a while. He had dozens of scientists working for him, dozens of PhDs, and he was the top dog. And this is what he said. Okay, he said, had Earth ever been molten, its dense, non-radioactive chemical elements, such as gold, would have sunk to the Earth's core. Gold is 70% denser than lead, yet it is found on the Earth's surface. And he goes on to say, if melted granite slowly cooled, like the textbooks are saying, the first mineral to solidify would sink to the bottom of the melt if it were denser than the melt, or it would float to the top of the melt if it were less dense than the melt. A layer cake of minerals would form instead of granite, which is a granular mixture of minerals. Therefore, the entire Earth was never molten. Okay, now this is from a PhD from MIT. Okay, and if it was molten, prove it. Prove it, because there's what's granite made of? Quartz, hornblende, feldspar, and mica. They all have different specific densities. If you say that granite came from a melt, prove it. Let's make some granite. And Robert Gentry, he discovered that granite has these polonium halos, which have a half-life of 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and it's still in the granite. So it had to cool right away. Otherwise, it's going to be gone. He said it's like dropping an Alka-Seltzer into water and finding those bubbles in ice. It had to be flash frozen, not slow. And this PhD from Penn State says, I support his 20-year-old challenge, as yet unmet, to the scientific establishment that it produced in the laboratory even a fist-sized piece of granite and the subsequent polonium halos in it. So you want to prove him wrong? Make some granite. And when they found out that his research was going against the Big Bang Theory, they cut his funding. Okay, they don't like that thing, that sacred cow being kicked. But you can read about it in Creation's Tiny Mystery. It's pretty fascinating. So this saying that granite is an igneous rock, I'd say prove it before you put it in there. And then evidence for plate tectonics. It says that convection currents, which are an important part of the theory of how seafloor spreading works, and they've got the diagrams, but there's a book out there, 20 Reasons to Question Plate Tectonics. And there's a guy who mapped the bottom of the ocean. I think it was Christian Smoot, F. Christian Smoot, I believe it is. He mapped the bottom of the ocean when he was in the Navy, and he says seafloor spreading doesn't work. Doesn't work. And this is what Walt Brown says. Again, a PhD from MIT. He says, rock that melts under the extreme pressure more than 220 miles below Earth's surface will contract. And it says, magma below the depth of about 220 miles is too dense to rise. So magma cannot circulate inside the mantle, contrary to what's been taught for 50 years. That's called the crossover density. And let's talk about that in class. So this thing here, prove it. Again, if you're going to teach it as fact, prove it. Explain that why that crossover density isn't working. Okay, and then understand the universe. Okay, one of the biggest mysteries of the universe is how the entire universe inflated at an extremely high rate from a point smaller than a single atom to the size of a baseball. This mystery continues to plague scientists, but the laws of physics do allow for such an event. And I couldn't believe it when I read that. Laws of physics allow for the Big Bang? Because that was the question that changed Spike Pissarris's life. Somebody asked him, how do you believe in the Big Bang and the laws of physics at the same time? And you can't. And then so it just changed his world. But then it says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. This is the first law of thermodynamics, but only changed from one form to another. Matter can be changed into energy, like an atomic bomb, little matter, lots of energy, and energy changed into matter. That's when you get these particles going to like the speed of light, and those particle accelerators slam them into each other, and you get more particles than what you started with. But you can't go from nothing to matter or nothing to energy. So how did that work? And it says, some have found contradictions between the law of conservation of energy and the Big Bang. Yeah, that was me. That was definitely me. I saw a contradiction there. But how do they do a mental gymnastic to get around that? It says the Big Bang theory only refers to the time after the singularity began to expand. Oh, the Big Bang doesn't account for how the matter got there, just like evolution doesn't account for how life got there. Well, I don't care where your theory starts. If you just have a blind chance perspective of the past, you believe in 4 miracles. You believe in matter, you're getting something from nothing. That's never been observed. Getting life from non-life, that's never been observed. And actually, the Origin of Life project is farther away now than when they had the Miller-Urey experiment, because the life is so much more complex than they realized back then. So the goalposts keep getting farther and farther away. And then getting order from chaos, you know, the second law of thermodynamics, things fall apart, they don't get more organized. And then getting the immaterial from the physical matter. This is called Einstein's gulf. He says, how do you go from matter to ideas? He said, or information. He says, that's a gulf that's unbridgeable. So that's Einstein's gulf. So those are 4 miracles that you have to believe in without a miracle maker. And I think that should be taught, more acknowledged in class. But this is the evidence for the Big Bang, cosmic background radiation, measurable expanse of the universe, the relative abundance of the different elements of the universe, and the known laws of physics. Yeah, okay. Well, that could just as easily point to, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and He stretched out the heavens. I mean, it could point to that too. And let's talk about that. See, anybody know what dark matter is? Anybody ever seen dark matter? You've seen dark matter?
Oh, yeah.
Where? See, dark matter isn't observable or testable. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, though. It says some sort of invisible matter. Those stars were not, these stars would not continue to follow their orbits. I think they're talking about spiral galaxies. Spiral galaxies can't last for millions of years. They'd be all wound up. So they need dark matter to keep them in their place. And that makes up 23% of the known universe. So 23% of it is dark matter. It's not observable or testable. You can't even see it. Okay, that's dark matter. And then it says that dark energy, the expansion of the universe was actually accelerating. So the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate, and they can't explain it. Unknown cosmic force that is contrary to gravity. They call it dark energy. And that's 73% of the known universe. So if dark energy is 73, dark matter is 23, that's 96% of the universe. And your theory that's supposed to explain everything can't explain 96% of it? I think it's time to look at another theory. And Dr. Danny Faulkner, he says that it's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if the Big Bang falls apart, it's a matter of when. He says they keep slapping on it, because he said when he was learning about the Big Bang in the 80s, they had 100% confidence in it. And it didn't have inflation or dark matter or dark energy or string theory. And that's all added to keep it from falling apart. And now they've added it, and now they got 100% confidence in it again. So he's saying it's going to fall apart. Okay, and then it goes on to say that helium cooled and formed, it was all hydrogen at the beginning, and then it cooled and it became helium, and that cooled and made lithium. So the question people need to ask, and I asked this at the fair, did hydrogen and helium turn into people? Who thinks hydrogen and helium turned into people? Okay, yeah, at the fair, it's like, no, people aren't buying it, because that's what the Big Bang made, hydrogen and helium. So 52 people said yes, 161 said no, and 45 didn't know. I did the same question at St. Cloud State, and it was really close. No won, 61 to 57. But if I would have left 15 minutes earlier, yes would have won. And again, that's a belief system. That's not science. That's not testable. You can believe it if you want. But what bothers me is they take my tax money to teach it as fact, even though it's not. And so what's happening with the school board? Widespread belief systems seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions such as universities, media, religious institutions, and the scientific and intellectual elite. So what's happening? The people in charge don't want things to change because they have the power. But when a vast number of people realize that they've been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get a vast number of people to realize that we've been misled. So then we can have a scientific revolution instead of just following the consensus. The consensus has been wrong a lot. And they can go into answers in my talk. We go into that quite a bit. But if you want academic freedom, if you want the freedom to think, then you can sign this petition. It's academicfreedompetition.com, where you can put some pressure on the legislators. And I've talked to legislators, hey, how about defunding schools that knowingly have false information in their textbooks? How about that? Because they should take the false information out, wouldn't you agree? And this guy says, when one person stands up to lies or oppression, then others become emboldened to do the same. So I encourage people to start asking questions. Where did matter come from? How did life begin? You know, those are valid questions. And they can't answer it. Those are belief systems. And again, I've got a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. You can see some of the school board comments on there. You can see a hydroplate list. But yeah, we just want people to get all the information. And I'm banging this as much as I can. I was on the Kent Hovind podcast about the errors in the textbooks. I was on Real Science Radio. And again, I encourage you to check out some of these sources so you get all the information. So you just don't blindly follow the false information. And this is what was false. Let's just quick recap and then we'll wrap it up. You know, that water equals life, well, that was false. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. That was false, according to a NASA scientist. And then the ocean, water started in the ocean. That was false, according to a PhD in chemistry. We're only 1.6% different from chimpanzees. That was false, according to Nature and PubMed and NIH and a PhD from Clemson. And then these fraudulent drawings, or these images real close to Haeckel's fraudulent drawings, that was false. And then saying that we haven't been able to figure out why our receptors are behind behind other cells, that's false. And then saying that Lucy had an almost complete skeleton, that was false. And then this evolutionary tree, there's no evidence for those underneath the branches. You know, that's false according to Stephen Jay Gould, who said the extreme rarity of transitional fossils is the trade secret of paleontology. Are they teaching that in class? And then also natural selection, that's misleading. They're ignoring epigenetics, and they're ignoring continuous environmental tracking. And this one's my favorite. It is the easiest one to prove wrong. They say that the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along the Hudson Bay. Well, NASA says that's wrong because they found it on the moon. They said in 2019. And then plate tectonics, that's questionable. That convection currents, I would say prove it. Yeah, show how that crossover density doesn't apply to that. And also that granite was an igneous rock. Prove it. Make it. Besides, instead of just teaching it as fact. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of these errors. You know, what are you going to do with it? If you want to go to a school board meeting tomorrow at 6:30, feel free to voice your opinion. You know, we can all benefit. I'm going to put the goal up there as, hey, let's have the community and the taxpayers and the school try and get accurate textbooks. That should be a pretty easy thing to get accomplished, I would think. And I'm just stunned at the resistance of our school board. We got the superintendent of the year, and she just kicked it to the curb. She said it's resolved, and I don't think so. So anyhow, we've got this QR code if you want more information, if you want to get involved. And we've got a local club that meets at the library also. So basically, we want you to get all the information so you can make informed decisions, and it's not happening in class. You're getting a blind chance perspective rammed down your throat, and I think that's, you're being victimized. All right, so that wraps up my talk. Does anybody have any questions? You had some?
I did, but I need to do more like research and stuff.
Sure. Oh, that's a great point. Don't believe anything I say, but check out what I'm saying to see if it's true. But also, don't believe your professor just because he says so. You know, we're both coming from a different perspective, and it's up to you to figure out which perspective is accurate. Which one's not imagining dark energy and dark matter? Which one's not cutting the hip of Lucy's? Which one's not having fraudulent embryo drawings? Which one's not having the Nebraska man hoax, saying it was an ape man when it was a pig? Which one's not having the Piltdown hoax? See, there's one perspective. The blind chance perspective of the past has a lot of hoaxes, and the creation model doesn't. But and this wasn't really so much to promote creation. This was just to make you look at what's being used to prop up a blind chance perspective. And be skeptical. Be skeptical of me. Be skeptical of the professors and the textbooks. Because they're being published by people that believe in a blind chance perspective of the past. That's like thinking this theater got put together by blind chance. That's pretty absurd, right? How much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance? Because our body's way more complex than a theater. And I was at the community college one time. I had a big monkey poster on my table in the lunchroom. It said, "Who's your daddy?" and had a big picture of a monkey face. I had that taped to my table in their lunchroom. A woman came by, and she said that she was trying to make points for creation, and I was making points for evolution, and I was making points for creation. And I said, if you went out to your car and you popped the hood on your car, would you think that your engine evolved? And she said, yeah, science has evolved to make the engine. And I said, no, not science evolved, that engine. Was that put together by chance random processes without any intelligence? And she said, no, there was intelligence involved. And I said, clearly. You know, a dead giveaway for intelligent design is multiple parts working together with precision timing for a purpose. And she agreed. And I said, well, guess what? Multiple parts working together, precision timing for a purpose. We were designed too. And she left, and then a student came up to me and said, do you know who that was? And I said, no clue. She said, that was the biggest, baddest atheist we got on campus. She said, and you kicked her butt. I was texting your comments to my friends. And it's not that I'm smarter than her. It's just that my perspective is logical. The other one is illogical. Okay. Does anybody have any other comments or questions?
Can we take a photo with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's go.
Absolutely. This is a first. That's never happened before.